So this is what your pelvic floor muscles look like. And these are really, really lovely, just diagrams. And I wish I could say that the real world, everything looked this clean and organized. It doesn't, but this is a great reference point to start with. So the pelvic floor in general, I also have my model here with me today, is a group of muscles that sits at the bottom of the pelvis. These are generally the same regardless of if you identify with biological male or female anatomy. The female anatomy, we've got a couple of extra muscles, but other than that, pretty much the same. They just look a little different externally. The pelvic floor in general is made up of 3 layers of muscles. Some providers will say 2, I prefer to say 3. And generally speaking, you've got a superficial layer. So this is the first layer of pelvic floor muscle. And then you've got a deep internal layer. And this is your deep layer of pelvic floor muscle. Now this first layer, and I can point to this picture right here, are the layers that we're going to encounter most externally if we were to look or do an assessment. And this layer of muscle is associated with sexual appreciation, which is an important function of our pelvic floor if we choose to participate in that type of activity. So these need to be operating and happy and healthy in order to accept anything, or if you're a male, this is where the fun sexual activity comes from, as well as this layer of muscle. And then the second layer is where our urethra, where our the part of our bladder that helps empty externally passes through that layer. It's not demonstrated on any of these graphs, but the deepest layer, this layer here, or this layer here, is where a lot of our strength and stability comes from. So in combination of all of these layers, the purpose of our pelvic floor, one, is to keep everything on the inside that's supposed to be on the inside. So keeping our organs well supported and structurally sound, keeping us continent, so our bowel and bladder contents stay on the inside until we're ready to release them. And then that sexual appreciation component. So in a nutshell, these are the kind of dysfunctions that I get to talk about on a daily basis. So these are the pictures, and I wanted to include this one because we have a little bit of a visualization of the nervous system contribution to the pelvic floor. And as you can see, this is a pretty beefy nerve. This is going to be part of your sciatic nerve. And then at the base of the sacrum here is what innervates the pelvic floor. And it's the base of our spinal column. So there is direct innervation. So we do see people with neurological injuries in this area as well. I also like this picture because it incorporates a finger component as well. I'm going to touch more on this in a minute, but this is how we assess the pelvic floor for the most part. It is a digital exam. So that is kind of the general overview of where the muscles are located, and their primary responsibilities are to keep us strong and stable, keep us continent, and able to participate in the sexual appreciation as we so choose to do. So what are the reasons someone needs to go to pelvic floor physical therapy? And in a nutshell, it's for some of the dysfunctions of the purpose of the pelvic floor. So you have pain, maybe you have some incontinence, which just means you're leaking either stool or urine. Maybe you have some organs that aren't being as well supported in that area that they're supposed to, which can happen to both females and males. Maybe you're feeling super weak and you're not able to get back into exercising and working out, or you just feel like something is a little off in this area of your body. Those are all things that people present to me with. I will say the 2 most common are some kind of pain, generally with sexual activity, and then some kind of incontinence. Urinary incontinence is much more common than fecal incontinence, but I treat both. So those are the predominant dysfunctions that somebody is coming to pelvic floor PT for. And maybe they're being sent to me because they did their own research online and thought they would be a good candidate, or maybe they're coming to me from their PCP or their GYN or their gastroenterologist. Some other specialist is going to send this client to me. And a lot of people want to know why. Why did this happen? And it's super, super common, and we just don't talk about it a lot, but there are a lot of different reasons why this type of dysfunction can occur. The most common that I run across is trauma. So it could be anything from a mental or emotional, meaning there was a traumatic event, there was an assault, there was an accident, there was a physical trauma. I see clients who have that kind of background, fortunately and unfortunately. Also, there can be what I like to call happy traumas, pregnancy, labor and delivery, regardless of how that baby was brought into the world, via vaginal delivery or C-section, good candidates for physical therapy. Maybe somebody had like a life-saving surgery that they needed, but they had to go through the abdomen, or maybe they had to go through the pelvic floor. And those are the kind of happy traumas that I think I can help people recover from, kind of traditional PT in that way. And then I also wanted to include repeated negative feedback. This is often a case I see most frequently, and it's usually women, and they're women who have maybe made the choice to save their intimate relationships for marriage, and they're with their partner, and it's supposed to be this beautiful, wonderful activity between a husband and a wife, and it doesn't work out the way they anticipated it to. And then they try again and try again and try again. And it just keeps kind of getting worse and worse and worse. There's this negative feedback loop of this activity that's supposed to be enjoyable, and it just isn't. And if you take that situation long enough over time, that can also result in some pelvic floor dysfunction. And I also wanted to include medical trauma. Kind of the same thing with the negative feedback loop. If you go and see a provider and you have a negative experience, you're going to hold that stress and tension in your body. So a lot of times I need to help people kind of overcome their concerns working with providers, because we need to go and see the doctor every once in a while. And it's important to be comfortable and open to any kind of exam that you may need for a healthy lifestyle. Some other things that I talk to people very often about: stress. So illness, we could even be talking about food poisoning. You're working too hard, you're not getting enough sleep, you're exercising too much, you're not resting enough. All of this can manifest in the muscles of our hips and pelvic floor. And then some other stuff that I get to talk about all the time is bad habits that we consider normal or typical. So maybe that's, I'm afraid to go to the bathroom in public, or I'm afraid of the germs in the bathroom, so I'm going to hold it for a really long time and ignore all of my needs. Or I'm going to go just in case, because I'm leaving and I don't know when I'm going to have access. So I don't really have to do anything, but I'm going to go to the bathroom just in case. And I see a lot of people, primarily like nurses and teachers, who have to ignore their own physical needs in order to take care of others. And then often over time that develops into some kind of dysfunction because your needs aren't being met. And then your body's going to say, if you're not listening to me, I'm going to stop sending you signals. And that's where we can get into trouble as well. So these are the most common reasons I see for some pelvic floor dysfunction. So intervention. Generally speaking, this is very, very broad, but someone comes to see me for one of two reasons. Their dysfunction is either related to genuine muscle weakness, meaning they literally don't have the strength in those muscles to do the job that they need to do, or, and this is much more common, they're having tension in that area, meaning these muscles need to be operating on a range of motion, just like any other part of our body. I'll use my bicep as an example. And when it's not, when it's stuck in a high tone, meaning it's stuck in this very shortened range of motion, we literally don't have the mobility of that group of muscles to do the job that they're supposed to do. So we call that high tone. So when I'm working with someone, we're either working on strength training or we're working on restoring range of motion. And actually restoring range of motion is what I spend more time doing. So when a lot of people come in and they're like, I've been doing Kegels for years and nothing has changed. I'm like, yeah, that's probably because we don't have the opportunity to use those muscles like you're supposed to, because they're stuck in this little shortened state. So we figure out you've got this dysfunction, we've done our assessment, you either have some weakness or some tension that we need to address. So what do I send you home with that day to help improve upon how you're feeling? And it's going to be a combination of discussing all of the lifestyle things that I've touched upon. So making sure, sorry. organ. So making sure that you're eating enough, you're drinking enough water, you're up and moving, you're sleeping okay. And then we're going to cater a more general program to what you need. So do we need to do some strength training right out of the gate? Do we need to do some stretching and some range of motion work right out of the gate? So I've included kind of just very general pictures of all of that. I've also included a picture of a set of dilators, because a lot of times this is what people think of when they think of pelvic floor physical therapy. And the dilator is just a tool to help restore range of motion in the pelvic floor. So I do talk about them quite a bit. And then the other thing that, in my opinion, is incredibly important as a provider is that I'm a very hands-on manual therapist. So I spend a lot of my time working on the soft tissue, working on the connections, working on tension all throughout the body to encourage the body to be as in balance as it can be. And this is also very important, especially when we're trying to reduce pain and discomfort. I'm looking at the musculoskeletal causes for that, and I'm usually able to calm down the whole system with some hands-on manual work. So I think that's super, super important. So if there is a central nervous system injury, so a spinal cord injury or a brain injury like a stroke, the neurological underlying of our pelvic floor muscle and organ function has been, in some cases, destroyed. So in that scenario, we're going to be working much more on how can we accommodate this dramatic change in someone's overall health for whatever reason. So that could be introducing somebody to absorbent undergarments. That could be teaching somebody to deal with chronic catheterization, or living with a catheter or a colostomy bag or something like that over time. So if something that dramatic has changed, we may not necessarily be able to help with any sort of intervention because the central nervous system has been injured. And there's not a ton that I can do about that other than teach someone how to accommodate this very dramatic injury to the body. So that's kind of what we can help with something that dramatic of a change. The physical trauma, a lot of times if there is something like a procedure warranted or unwarranted, for example, an appendectomy, or maybe somebody has to have like a hysterectomy or something, like if there's a procedure that's necessary to happen, or there's been some kind of non-consensual activity or an assault in that area. What our body does to deal with that trauma in a nutshell is we kind of go into a very tight protective stance. We kind of revert back to that fetal position. We bring everything back to midline and everything is tight and tense. And our body is trying to protect us in that kind of situation, which is wonderful for short-term temporary intervention, but long-term, we're not able to function very well if we're living in this tight, tense state all the time with our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight nervous system, always on. We need to be able to bring the whole system down into the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest part of our central nervous system, in order to sleep, digest food, eliminate easily, and live life without pain. So if I'm dealing with somebody who has that kind of trauma in their background, then yes, we can have a super positive intervention with that. And a lot of that is what we refer to as central nervous system down training. So taking us from that tight, tense state that our body has utilized as a protective response, and then bringing somebody back into a much more comfortable, normalized state where they function and can live a lot happier. So that's the type of central nervous trauma that I have a great, great impact on. Yes, please spread the word. I feel like the best thing that we can do for everyone, because we all have muscles, we all have pelvic floors, we all need to be able to operate well to be happy. We don't talk about it. We just don't talk about it. So I was hoping I'm doing a good job, but I'm super passionate about just getting the word out and normalizing sharing this information with our friends and our loved ones. And most of the people that walk into my office are people that found us on Facebook or their mom's group, or now there's a lot of providers who are super popular on Instagram and TikTok. So these people are coming from social media and they're coming into my office because some influencer told them that this was a thing. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's me. I'm living with incontinence or I'm living with pain and I don't have to live like that. That's crazy. Let me go see a provider. So education and talking about it and normalizing this stuff is so, so important. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share. And clearly I'm a little passionate about it. So I feel super blessed to have this opportunity to share what I know, even if it's probably could be a little bit better, but